Okay.
Okay. Should I put this mic on or something?
I think so.
No, like when.
Like when I will pick up. I think it's
All
going to
right.
pick up.
Okay.
Let me welcome to the seminar jointly organized by PSS, SIPG, and SANPA. I hope some SANPA people are out there waiting to join online. It's my pleasure to welcome Professor Mansoob Murshed from the ISS in The Hague, which I'm an alumni. Professor Mansoob Murshed is a professor of economics of conflict of peace. Interesting topic. And he has been there from 2000. When is it?
21.
2000, yeah, 2001. And he has been there. Also held the Prince Claus Chair in Development Inequality in 2003. He has published extensively. He's got 8 books and 150 book chapters in journal articles. His research interests are economics of conflict, aid conditionality, political economy, macroeconomics, international economics. Okay. With that small introduction, Professor Mansoob, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. It's a great pleasure to be here. And so today's talk focuses on the 3.
Maybe you can use the mic where people are joining on online can hear you.
I don't know if this doesn't go on.
Okay, maybe I can. It doesn't turn. Yep, thanks.
Yeah, on the 3 headings of my talk today, one of which is the second heading, authoritarianism. People, whenever I hear my, relatives, when they put on the television, I hear the F word associated with Mussolini all the time. So authoritarianism is not a concept which is alien in this part of the world. Populism is, because populism is different from authoritarianism. A populist leader may be elected within a multi-party democratic, so-called democratic system. So within an electoral democracy. The third heading over here is inequality. Now, this is something in developing countries, it doesn't interest, the well-heeled at all. But as Trotsky said in a different context, the Russian revolutionary and thinker Leon Trotsky there's a famous quotation from him about war. He says, "You may not be interested in war, but war is interested in you." So therefore, ladies and gentlemen, you may not be interested in inequality, but inequality is interested in you, because it's sure to come and hit in a way that it's hit the richer countries of the world. Okay, if I can get... Let's just start off over here, because this is an institute where people have a background perhaps in political science and international relations. The only thing in international relations which interests me is the so-called liberal peace idea. So basically the liberal peace says, well, a society itself or countries themselves will be at peace with one another if they share common democratic values, if they are economically interdependent, which means they trade a lot with each other or they invest a lot in the other countries. Also, common membership of international organizations. So, for example, the best example of the liberal peace idea is the European Union. So within the European Union, you have these rogue countries which have a lot of which have historical territorial claims on other countries, but because of the acquis communautaire, these territorial demands are, shall we say, filed and forgotten. I mean, Hungary, used to control a large part of Romania. Most of Poland was in historical Germany, but, these things are forgotten. There's also this mantra which comes out of, and it is a mantra in the classical Vedic sense, which comes out of the Holy of the Holies, which is not the first or second temple, but it's the universities. We work in universities, so the most influential universities in the world are located in Cambridge, Massachusetts, just on the other side of the Charles River. So on one side you have Boston, and the Harvard Medical School is on the Boston side, but the main campus is on the Cambridge side. And if you drive further, you come to these ugly buildings, which look like something constructed by Mussolini or Stalin, but it houses the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And out of there, you have pronouncements which we must all obey and listen to. And one of them is a tautology, which states that good institutions are what causes long-term growth. I mean, growth in the long run and the short run might be related to what the governor of the central bank does, or, the tariffs imposed on exports of goods. But in the very long run, it is argued by them quite cogently that our good institutions are what causes growth. And institutions are obviously politically determined. I don't want to repeat their logic. I used to do that when I unfortunately had to teach master's students, growth theory and part of that. But thank God I won't be doing much of that in the near future. So I won't go through the mechanisms of how institutions determine growth, but these authors, I should mention their names, shouldn't I?
Maybe.
Yes, there's a trio or a duo, depending upon how you. So the first name author, his name should be pronounced Acem Olu, where the C in Turkish is a J, but most people mistakenly call him Acem Oglu. So it's Acem Olu. And the second author who's dropped out of the trio at the moment, it's like the Rolling Stones or the Beatles, some members of the band fall out. Johnson. And the third author is Robinson, and I think Robinson is no, he's the smartest of them all. He's definitely floating around, and he's the most interested in development as well, because his lady wife is from one of those forever developing countries in Latin America. The country in question is called Colombia. But basically, economics and politics are inseparable. This is something which is not often stated, and is not often stated, not even stated by Ajumulu and Robinson. And I'm trying to go back. That's naughty. Where's the... Do I need to share the screen with... Yeah. Do I need to share the screen with people who are potentially joining? Yeah. It's already shared. All right. Okay. So let's go back. So basically, their idea was that economic institutions, particularly the rule of law and contract enforcement, are what is necessary to promote growth in the long run, because it creates the congenial environment for investment. So investment is less risky. So economics and politics are inseparable. Then you heard of something called globalization. We all have. And there are critiques of globalization, including Joseph Stiglitz. My personal favorite is the another Turkish economist called Dani Rodrik. Rodrik is a name which is associated with, Iberia, Spain, Portugal. So in the dim and distant past, his ancestors came from. Yeah, no prize for guessing what the other aspects of his ethnicity. So basically, he's a critique of globalization, which says that globalization is essentially something which promotes many of the major economic problems that we have in the world. So everyone is in favor of uh, trade and freer trade. Everyone is worried by, the disruption to trade, which is likely to take place because of policies in the United States. But sometimes too much globalization can cause problems. I think I'll sort of come back to it later on in the talk. The problem that it creates is the problem I mentioned, the third pillar of my talk, which is inequality. And let me remind you again, if you speak about inequality or economic inequality or other forms of inequality in countries like Bangladesh, I mean, people just generally start taking a nap. They fall asleep because they're not interested. But as I said, this is one of those which Trotsky mentioned, in connection with the war. You may not be interested in inequality, but you are definitely going to be affected by it, directly and indirectly. Even if you are completely uninterested in it, you as an exporter of what is called garments in this country will be affected, because inequality is what is essentially producing the trade policy of the United States at the moment, through a very convoluted process, through lots and lots of mechanisms in the middle. So before I came here, I was listening to lectures given by someone called Robert Reich, who was Secretary of Labor in the United States under Bill Clinton during his presidency. And I couldn't help noticing that, how much agreement, or even though he's, very distinguished, that, there's so much overlap in our thinking. So basically, too little inequality de-incentivizes, but too much inequality in basic, if you're teaching inequality, say in economics classroom, you would say too little inequality de-incentivizes people from investing and taking risks, but too much inequality can be a problem. And it's really, the problem is political and social. And of course, in many of the developed countries of the world, we are facing a situation where people who are young are likely, or Generation Z, or even Generation X, there's a very strong chance that it'll be poorer than your parents. Say in the United States, if you were born in 1940, there's a 99% chance that you would earn more than your parents did. If you're born in 2000, it reverses itself. There's more than a 50% chance that you'll earn less than your parents. Okay, so this is to put it mildly, a bit of a problem. And what is it associated with? It's associated with a number of phenomena. And, when I was first looking at it, and I looked at the literature, I did some work on it, the first straw man that you would accuse of being guilty in this respect would be something called globalization. And of course, I mean, I'm a great fan of Danny Roderick, and he refers to something called the globalization trilemma, where the simultaneous achievement of three objectives, namely national sovereignty, democracy, and hyper-globalization, participation world in the world trade and financial system, this is impossible. You have to bow your head to certain rules of global financial markets. Some people would call it capitalism. But this was not the case during an earlier period. So there's something in the Western world, in the non-communist, non-socialist developed world, which is referred to either as the golden age, the glorious years, the period roughly 30 to 35 years after the Second World War. The reason it's called the golden age is that because you had growth with redistribution, growth with falling inequality, growth where the productivity gains which took place with growth were shared equally along all socioeconomic classes. No one was left behind. Similarly, growth globally was also well distributed. Nearly all developing countries, whether they were located in Latin America, Africa, or Asia, all grew at similar rates, high rates. Okay. So then we have something else. Let me just make a digression and go into the discussion of democracy and autocracy. So here we have something where there's a consensus in political science. And the consensus states that we are living through the third wave of autocracy. And so you have waves of democracy, they're usually followed by waves of autocracy. So according to these great sages, the first wave of democracy was after the First World War. And in the 1930s, you have, this wave of autocracy, no prizes for guessing who was leading that: Mussolini, Hitler, and all the great dictators of the 20th century. Similarly, after the Second World War, you have a period of rising democracy, followed by, again, autocracy, led by military dictatorships. After the Cold War, you have a rise in democracy, again, followed by our current phase of autocracy. So there's a very good, in my opinion, data set called the Varieties of Democracy data set, which I hope you're unfamiliar with, because then I can discuss it a little bit. Basically, countries are divided into 4 categories of countries. So at the top of the list are countries which are called liberal democracies. These are countries which not only permit a multi-party competition where governments are elected, but are also characterized by the separation of powers, which means the executive, legislature, and judiciary are somehow separated. And above all, there is an independent judiciary. In addition to that, there is a degree of tolerance, acceptance of minorities, kill the immigrants, deport them, tolerant of minorities. Okay. Then you have a second category of countries who are more numerous, and those are described as electoral democracies. Countries which have elections, and they're reasonably fair, but they elect governments which are not liberal. For example, you could work it out. Not very far away. Yeah. Then you have a third category of countries who are elective autocracies. So they are also elected, but the elected government behaves completely dictatorial. And this is a very, very large group. In fact, this is the largest group.
China, Russia,
No, they don't. They fall into the fourth group, which is established autocracies. So a populist government is not a government which are a government in an elective autocracy, but is in the third category. Okay, so they're elected. So the occupant of 2000 Pennsylvania Avenue, better known as the White House, might be considered one. The great leader next in the neighboring country might be considered to be another one. The leader of Hungary, occasionally in other countries as well. Okay, so basically, there's a decline in the democratic credentials in recent years. Okay? And this is parallel to that is the growth in economic inequality in terms of both income and wealth. So wealth inequalities tend to be greater than income inequalities because these are based upon asset. Asset ownership is less equal than income ownership. Even if income is unequal, it is less unequal than asset inequality. All right. But if I were teaching an economics class, I would say, well, inequality instrumentally has certain problems. One is that, inequality was identified as one of the major factors behind the global financial crisis of 2008. Okay. Why? Because there was a subprime mortgage market, and the poorer segments of society in the United States had access to credit, which they should, but it created instability in financial markets, and the richer groups wanted very high returns on their financial asset holdings, so it led to unsustainable investments in the stock market. Okay, so instrumentally, we have that. So before I go into that, let me just, mention something else. There are also two other findings by staff at the IMF and published as IMF working papers, which are very interesting. Excuse me. The first finds in a cross-country, econometric study that excessive inequality in income hampers growth. So basically, countries which are interested in growing their economy should watch out. Excessive inequality instrumentally lowers growth. And you might ask why. But, the answers are not very clear-cut to why. Right? The other is that, social protection expenditure, public expenditure on health, education, as well as transfers to the poorer segments of society, were traditionally viewed in economics as something which crowded out private investment. So whenever the government spent money, excessive government expenditure on social protection lowered growth because it crowded out private sector investment. Now this has been discovered to be either not the case or the case in an extremely weak, statistically insignificant way. So social protection expenditure does not crowd out private investment. So I thought I'd do something different over here, and I talk about something called global inequality. So we have inequality within a nation state, but we also have, no, wrong way around. Try this. No, try this.
What should go over? Yeah.
Yeah, we are going. I just want to go back. Yeah. Supposing we want to look at inequality, okay, usually the unit of analysis is the nation state. That is the context in which we measure inequality. And it's measured by a metric known as the most common metric is known as the Gini coefficient, which ranges from 0 to 1 or 0 to 100. 0 means no inequality. Each group has an equal share relative to its size, has an equal share of the population average, right? And 100 or 1 would mean perfect inequality. One group has all the income or wealth, right? So this is usually measured within the nation state. But if you are, it's also interesting to look at it globally. So there are 3 ways of looking at it. One is to look at per capita income, so the average income in different nation states. So supposing there are roughly something approaching 200 nation states. So we think the world is composed of 200 individuals. Each nation state corresponds to an individual who has a per capita income of that country. And we all know that it is not at all equally distributed. Now we can, then there is also a question, if we had to conduct this exercise, why are we conducting this exercise? And the answer is data, data, and data, okay? Because we have data on national income accounting, national income for a lot of countries in the world, going back to the 1950s. Okay, supposing I was teaching this to a bunch of MA students, I would ask them a question, or pick one student at random and ask them a question. So I would ask them, what would I ask them? I would ask them, okay, can you tell me which country in the world had systematic national income accounts? First of all, which was the first country to have national income accounts? So the answer is, I don't give them multiple choice, but they have to guess the country. And most of them think it's the USA. No, it's also the country we used to refer to, which had a U before the acronym. before the acronym for the country. The UK is one, but it's not the UK.
Okay.
So which other country had the U as an acronym, not the full name? So it's not Uruguay.
Okay.
It's an acronym. So what could it be?
It's not UAE.
UAE.
The UAE not even existed.
Is it the US?
US, you're right, Zach. You correctly guessed. It was the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union was the first country. And when did the Soviet Union start? Well, after the First World War. So systematic national income accounts are quite recent, but economic historians, those economic historians who can count more than page numbers, those who are really quantitative, to work on this, and they deduce national income from data on wages and prices. So from there, they extrapolate. But, if you're really interested in the veracity of data, that's that's intelligent guesswork. But we have per capita income, okay? So the next question is, are you going to treat China and St. Kitts and Nevis equally? Or sorry, India has overtaken China. India and St. Kitts, and with one country with 1,200 million people and another country with less than 1,000 people? Or are you going to assign population weights? So the results can be different. The third concept is a more appealing concept, but we are hampered here by data paucity. Okay, we don't have data. And that is basically, yesterday someone switched on the television and there was some idiotic talk about surveys, right? So the World Bank insists on all member countries conducting a living standards measurements survey. So this living standards measurement survey is a universal survey, despite a lot of it being lost in translation. So it's translated into hundreds of languages, but the idea is the same questions are asked, but they're not. So, for example, in rural South Asia or in rural Africa, rural households are not asked questions about their income. They're asked questions about their expenditure. And then we bravely go out and say that their expenditure is equal to their income. This is not done in Latin America. It's not done in China. Chinese national income accounts are notoriously unreliable. But so we usually look at energy emission, energy consumption as a measure of national income. Anyway, beside the point. So we divide 8 billion people in the world and we array them according to their income. But you have to have household surveys. Otherwise, it's not done. Can't be done. And, countries like China, Vietnam, or the former Soviet Union, or countries in Eastern Europe, there were no household surveys in the good old days. This is post-Cold War. So you're hampered. You can't do this analysis really until the Cold War is over, that period, okay? Whereas with concept 1 and 2, you can go back to the 50s, the good old 60s, So you can, but you cannot with concept 3 because there's no data. So what do we get? So the picture looks very different pre and post 2000 because of these two huge countries, China and India. So look at this. This is just between 50 to 2000. So you look at one metric, category 1, the number is increasing. Let me remind you, when the number increases, it means more inequality. And when the number decreases, it means more egalitarians. So let's just remind ourselves, after all, what is it? If we are looking at per capita income differences, then the major factor will be this. We're measuring the distance between a rich country, let's say the United States, the distance between them and a poor country.
Burundi.
If that distance diminishes, then inequality will fall. And if that distance increases, then global inequality will rise. Okay. So we are covering the period 50 to 2000. In 1950, we will have very little data on sub-Saharan African countries. But by 1985, we would. So we'll know data on the countries which Rizwan Bhai was whispering in his mouth, Burundi, for example, or Angola or Mozambique, no data for 85. But look, if you look at category 2, then inequality is falling. If you look at category 1, then inequality is rising. So category 1 is where you treat, St. Kitts and Nevis, which is a nation state with about 1,000 inhabitants, and say China, which was more populous in those days than India, with 1,200 million people equally. So each country, no matter how big or small, is a unique policy experiment. They can mess up, they can do things well, or they can do things not so well, shades of gray, black and white, whatever. Category 2 is driven to a great extent by what happens in the more populous countries of the world. So between the two of them, China and India will drive nearly half of 40% plus of the move. So what happens there? Okay. So as you all know, there was a takeoff in China. And when did that start?
1970.
There's a date there which is kind of peculiar. Which date is that? In the first column. There's 50, 60, 70. And why is it not 1980?
Yeah, for the Tiananmen incident.
You remember someone whose hand used to shake when he was eating with his chopsticks? Deng Xiaoping? Yeah, okay. So in 1978, they reformed agriculture in China. For want of a better word, they privatized it. And he made this famous statement, which I make myself in a microeconomics class, which I fortunately do not teach anymore. Basically, in the economics of information, when teaching moral hazard and adverse selection, incentives. So he said, to get rich is glorious. So that's the translation from Mandarin, Chinese. And so since then, China has been growing. So therefore, if China is growing, this global inequality metric based upon what? Based upon population weighting the per capita income of countries will fall. So if China is getting closer, and we haven't even come to the present, we are only talking about 2000. If China is getting closer to the United States, and then we have the man with the turban. Who's that? Will you remember? Rizwan Bhai, who that was? a man with a turban, a prime minister of a country, or a man with a turban who was a prime minister.
Manmohan Singh.
Exactly. So he
From
he
India.
makes changes things a bit. So India's growth rates rise above what many Indian economists, not my words, I'm being recorded, so I've got to be careful. Not my words. Many Indian economists call the Hindu rate of growth.
We have faculties, we will have to catch it, their transport by
Right.
5 p.m. Then you will go a little bit faster. Otherwise, half of the audience will be.
No.
Yeah.
So so that's what happens. Now it all changes after 2000 because growth rates in countries in sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America, which were low in the 80s and 90s, they start to catch up. And the picture looks different. So the divergence between concept 1 and concept 2 ends. Now, basically, you can decompose global inequality, the concept 3 global inequality, into within country and between country components. Okay? You can also decompose it and say what part of it is due to location and what part of it is due to your occupation. And unlike in the past, most of the inequality in the world is driven by location. So if you look at concept 3 inequality, so the Gini coefficient is very high, it's about 70. And global inequality between countries is declining. That's because China and India are catching up with the richer countries of the world. The catch-up process is not going to be as quick as some people think it might be, but it still occurs. But there are a number of problems. Since you've asked me to hurry up, I should just quickly speak through it, which I won't go into. All right, skip this.
Yeah.
So I'll finish now. Okay. So I'll stop talking about inequality and then go to something which is known as the Red Queen effect. Now, this is also based upon what the more recent work done by Ajamolu and Robinson without Johnson, and is known as the narrow corridor. And it's got nothing to do with institutions and growth, but it's about basically the type of society we live in, which is a kind of interesting topic for an economist like Dan and Ajamolu. Jim Robinson isn't strictly an economist, so that's perfectly fine. So he says, but basically we could be living in two types of societies. One is a dictatorial society, which could be developmental or could be not so developmental. The other is anarchy. And in the middle, you have a narrow corridor, which is called the liberal society. And this narrow corridor might be influenced by a variety of exogenous factors, such as what's going on in neighboring countries, what's going on in the world, whether there's an autocratic wave or a democratic wave, and so on. And transitions could take place, but if you're in the liberal corridor, if you're fortunate enough to live in a liberal corridor, there has to be some sort of healthy competition between the state and non-state actors. And I hate the word civil society because it has very negative connotations as far as I am concerned, but other people like it. But there has to be competition between state and non-state actors. And that's where the Red Queen effect comes in. I mean, I don't think many of us, I have, but I don't think many of us have read Lewis Carroll's Alice in the Wonderland and its sequel, Through the Looking Glass. So Through the Looking Glass, there's a red queen who runs but doesn't move, is running but is stuck at the same place. So this is where you need to run to stay at the same place. So therefore, there's a red queen effect. So there you have this narrow corridor. So can you imagine a situation where you go from one quadrant, and I haven't drawn a diagram, I don't know. Yes, I do have a diagram.
Yeah, that's right.
So you go from this dictatorship to a state of anarchy, and you never enter the liberal phase. Can you imagine such a country? Anyway, you asked me to stop, so I shall stop.
Myanmar, Libya.
I think it's where I'm sitting right now. Myanmar is not like that. Myanmar is a dictatorship.
Dictatorship still. So
Okay, so that's it.
okay, so what is
You asked me to hurry up. I finished at 10 to 5. So you can catch the transport. And you stop. Oh, by the way, let me tell you a funny story. At the last undergraduate class I did, people were behaving exactly like you, Rizwan Bhai. They were texting all the time.
Okay.
So I told them, do you know, this was in the West, and that you are going to be poorer than your parents, which is going to happen statistically, like cancer, to 80% of people nowadays. And this will happen in your country as well. Just wait for it. It will happen 25 years later, but it will happen here. Okay? As Trotsky said, you may not be interested in inequality. He said about war, it's coming. It's going to, technology will replace everything. Okay? And it could go in different ways. So I told them, stop texting, and unless you get a good grade, you're going to be poorer than your parents.
Even with gold grades, they won't do good jobs. That's not guaranteed.
No. Certainly, they have no chance.
So let me start with the question. So if you go, probably I'm too dumb to understand this.
Don't worry, so am I.
And I still didn't get it that how this your title fits it with your presentation.
Because there's inequality there. Inequality is basically what is instrumental in creating both plutocracy, and it has a part in the authoritarian system. So inequality produces plutocracy and populism. So basically, the authoritarian trend in the world is to a great extent driven by inequality.
How do you?
So I skipped because Rizwan Bhai asked me to skip a mathematical model. So you take a median voter, who do the median voter vote for in the November 2024 election? So about 52% of the people voted for Trump.
Because he wanted to make America great again.
You got it completely wrong. It's the people who are disadvantaged who voted for him. So they're focusing on, a red herring, which is, make America great again. They think, and that's the model I presented last week to the economists, they think that by voting for Trump, they will recreate 1970. And if I had more time, I would give you the data for that period. That's the period when inequality fell, when, incomes of the below median group increased, which doesn't happen nowadays, right? Particularly in the United States, but elsewhere, the Western world. And we don't have so much information for developing countries, but it's not dissimilar. We have a higher inequality tolerance. So, for example, in traditional South Asian cultures, we have very high inequality tolerance. Other societies, particularly in the Middle East, have low inequality tolerance. So does the Chinese Sinitic society. So inequality is what drives the populism. And populism would take us to the dictatorship corridor.
How do you explain the Chinese case?
The Chinese case is still yet to unravel.
Because your data was showing that in Chinese case, mobility.
China's growth rates have completely stalled.
The last few
But
years.
the question of inequality is.
China has lower inequalities than most other countries. It has low inequality tolerance.
So then why they are. So I just want to understand that how the Chinese.
One of the reasons the Chinese system has not imploded could be because they pay more attention to what is happening to the bottom quintile of the population than in other countries.
That makes sense. Yeah.
So the inequality is the main thing, which is what this is a result of either technology or globalization. All of it means that essentially we have a degree of financial capitalism in the world, which is pretty unprecedented, at least since the First World War, and that results in very high inequality. So that produces the political instability which causes countries which were liberal to become less liberal. And the way it occurs is through the election of populist leaders, through their electoral process.
Have you checked the data? Sorry, I'm taking too much time for others to ask questions. Have you checked the data with the historical trend of authoritarianism? For example, during Hitler's period in Germany, was the inequality the cause for so-called populism or authoritarianism? Was that case also the same in the Hitler Germany? Did you check the data at that time?
I don't have to. You can see that Germany, in the macroeconomic data, was deeply affected by the events of 1929. And you had a German chancellor who followed cyclical rather than counter-cyclical macroeconomic policies. So therefore, the national income of Germany, this is well known, declined, unemployment increased tremendously, and it resulted in more votes for the National Socialist Democratic Workers' Party.
For my side, the last question, and that's my political science question. You don't need to answer that.
Please don't make last question.
No, for my side.
Political science. Because I missed it.
I just try to understand that this is also a question of voting behavior. So because there are hundreds of theories and this literature is written on voting behavior, Maobai is one of the
I just go for downs, the median
I
voter.
understand that why when people really feel inequality, why do they feel to behave differently in their voting action? What is the reason?
That's very well. There's a huge, immense literature on it. I mean, it is, So basically, if I have to summarize the literature has a number of strands. One is that you punish the expert, you punish the prevailing leaders who have allowed this inequality to emerge by voting for someone who says, at least, I am going to bash up those people who made you poor. So, I mean, for example, exit polls in the 2016 general election in the USA, people made statements like this. I mean, this will describe it better. I know Trump is a expletive, but he's going to teach a lesson to the expletive person who has caused my plight. Okay, so there are huge data, there's huge studies and data of something which we call spatial inequality in the United States and in other countries like the UK and even France, where you look at certain areas which are really falling behind. So they're referred to as the Rust Belt, and areas which, for example, if I travel 15, 20 miles from where I live, I can go to areas where, once upon a time they had thriving industries, but are now totally devastated. So those are and you know what? By what they think that has devastated them is, trade with other countries. So, for example, there was a car factory where the cars come from somewhere else. There were steel mills in, the Midwest of the United States. Now you import the steel from Korea or China. So they identify with those things, and was allowed by someone who shared the same name as one of the defeated presidential candidate of 2016. So you punish them. So another thing is cognitive dissonance, which is a psychological term to describe you want to believe what you want to believe. And this can be incorporated in decision theory into something called prospect theory. And I talked about that I believe, at another floor of this building on Thursday last, where I looked at the voting behavior of the median voter. So what we are interested over here is the so-called median voter, the one who's right in between and whose vote is going to swing the election in favor of either party. Okay, it comes from Downs, and Downs's view was that it's economic interests. By the latest, my view and my model they're not interested in their economic interests. They know their economic interests are totally devastated. No matter which candidate comes, they are going to remain poor. So let's vote for a candidate who will make us poorer, but will actually punish those whom we dislike.
Let me I'm so sorry that I missed such a wonderful presentation.
No, it wasn't. I hurried it up.
We were at another meeting, so I was trying to get out.
I think we should have them after 10 o'clock at night. Then we will have meetings.
By Justice Barroso, let me quote him. He said, in most cases, authoritarian populism bears the mark of personalistic and charismatic leaders that manipulate the fears, the needs, and the desires of the population, often promising simple and mistaken solutions for complex problems. Here's the issue, that they create a kind of us versus them, a dichotomy. And by doing that, or say, enemy-friend dichotomy, by doing that, they actually manipulate. So whether this particular segment of the voters, they side with their populist leaders, is a question to what extent they are manipulated by this. As a matter of fact, we observe this not only in America, we observe in India as well. So
you missed my talk.
No.
That's what I said.
But it is recorded. I'll pass it on to you.
So
I'll pass on the recording.
Actually,
it was in hindsight, it was a mistake not presenting the mathematical model, because Has all of those things.
Yeah, but then you can send it to me. I can share this out.
No, I won't
Please,
send it.
I will appreciate. If you
I have sent it to you. You're just always texting. You
No, no. The back about data partition. I thought the one that you did in economics. That had more.
কোনোভাবে পেতে পারি
হ্যাঁ?
আজকে একটা কোনোভাবে পাওয়া যাবে
নিশ্চয়ই।
That was nice.
See, এটা I have sent it to you. You forgot to download it.
So,
Yes, so good.
yes, thank you, sir. It was a wonderful presentation. Although I have liked this, just the other way around. If we had started from inequality,
Right.
then nationalism would have been better. But to understand
I just thought that, inequality is something which doesn't, resonate in countries. People say, what,
when you have presented the case, inequality actually leads to the other two.
Yeah.
That's why we could have started from inequality but
the other way
it can
around.
also be the other way around also. So I'll just with a positive time ask you to relate to the developments of say South Korea of 1970s, where we see authoritarianism going up. At the same time, productivity going up, distribution also going up.
1970.
1970s, part of this period of
Where? Korea is 70 Korea, South Korea.
Yeah, part from this period.
Oh, Park. Oh, sorry.
Park's regime. Yeah, so it is just opposite to what
No. I mean, you could argue that.
I'm not. And it is giving another example. So, like Yugoslavia, although these are outlier cases, but it's not only economic, inequalities that determines. There are many other inequalities, racial inequalities, this religious, all kind of inequalities can play. In a particular society, one set of inequality will be important. In another situation, another set of inequality will prevail. So, say like Yugoslavia, I'm sure the data will say that inequality was reducing from 50s till
In the fall of Soviet Union.
before the balkanization. So it is not, in that case, it is not related to inequality. It is something else. It was basically crude nationalism that was more related to ethnicity than to economic status. So that is another thing. So, but generally, I think I would endorse what you say in general. But I have one or two small observations in saying that when we have this nationalism expressing itself in a particular society, we have a tendency to accept inequality also. We tend to be subjective in our analysis. When you are driven by nationalism, you try to accept, subjectivity, and by doing so, you also, in a way, allow yourself to be dominated by authoritarianism because the institutions are not working then. So, in a way, one helps the other. So, generally, what you have said, I say is that I fully endorse your views, but at the same time, there are some outlier cases. We can also examine them in greater detail. Thank you.
No, I didn't make I never would make a connection between democracy and growth. This is something I avoid because, it can go either way. And so I wasn't talking about democracy and growth. I just said right at the beginning that we have waves of democracy and waves of autocracy. Now, South Korea is a country which became truly democratic shortly before the end of the Cold War. And the end of the Cold War was followed by the third wave of democratization, which is described by, various authors, including Huntington. And this has been followed by a present wave of authoritarianism. And this authoritarianism is basically composed of, two groups of countries. Essentially, most of them are populist authoritarian countries because the populist leader, even though they are elected by a democratic process, become authoritarian, right? Like the POTUS of the United States at the moment, and of course others. But the established autocracies are very few. You know, there it's basically China, which is the establishment.
But it's, maybe piggybacking a little bit. Yeah.
Finish
So,
on
okay.
on that point.
The populism is definitely driven by inequality. There are studies which show that. Okay, and vote for the populists presidential candidates in Latin America increases when inequality increases. Okay, there's and you have the cases, you know, the most striking cases in the United States and to a certain extent in some countries in Central Europe. Okay, limited extent, it changes there. And you have a different type of a developing country populist in India, right? So they're all talking about the straw men are totally different. Right?
But one thing is very important in in nationalism is that it in a way breeds blindness. You become blind to many of this.
Yes, that was, you know, in my mathematical model, the voter is blind to his economic interest. So he's voting for two political alternatives. To keep it simple, it could be so basically in that PowerPoint, that paper or whatever, it's based upon, these are all based upon a number of papers I've done, not just one.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's a synthesis it's drawn from, it's cannibalized from 3-4 papers. Therefore, you can see some places the text is very long because I've just copied and pasted from my. But essentially over there, you know, the voter is not voting on objective economic interests, because voting for Trump is going to make him worse off, but is driven by some other interest that he has. You know, we can call that "Make America Great Again." We can call it by any. I personally believe that I find the most plausible explanation is that the other candidate is actually is a person who has taken us down the river. Okay. You know, I dislike the other candidate even more, okay, because of what her husband did when he was the president and promised us when NAFTA was created, the North American Free Trade, that, you know, we will be compensated for the loss of our jobs in the steel mills.
Which has not happened at all.
Which has not happened at all. I mean, if I were a blue collar worker in the US, I would vote for Trump in 2016. And even in 2024.
But his vote bank has increased actually from
slightly, yeah.
So here is the issue that this manipulation.
Not manipulation. This is a rational decision made by a voter.
I come to this point. But it is basically the strategy is manipulation. Why? Because in established democracy, institutions are supposed to be in charge of the things, but the populist leaders, they appear to be demagogue. Because they speak in that terms, they mobilize people. We have seen what Hitler did. So we go to the extreme example. Just because people are driven by their appeal does not necessarily mean that they are taking the right decision at that moment. I agree with you that they hate the alternative candidate even more.
You mean the voter is not taking the right decision?
Exactly.
I don't want to penalize the voter. I mean, you know, basically this is discussed in Aristotle's Politics, so it's not anything new that democracy will produce demagogues. Classical liberals were not in favor of one person, one vote, because they thought that, you know, if you give, you know, the uneducated the vote, they would do all sorts of
that's the reason of the college system.
Okay, which were undesirable, including making society illiberal. yeah, which means not tolerating minorities, things like that. Okay, so which is something we observe in a developing country context, populism, right? So
What is the solution, Dr. Murshed?
oh, come on. I mean, this
No
is a
solution.
naive question to ask. I'm not in the United Nations or in an NGO. This is a university. No one talks about
Don't worry
solutions.
about your accountability. Don't worry about your accountability.
No.
We are with you.
I mean,
So,
I worked for 2 years for a UN organization, and wherever I was sent by them, people would ask me, what can we do to increase trade and investment? Well, after a while, I used to tell them that, look, it's just your luck, you know. The famous economist Keynes said that investment is driven by high animal spirits, you know. You can do everything and nothing will happen, you know. All that is, you can at least, won't have any regrets. If you do the right thing and you still don't get the results, you won't regret that you didn't try. At least you tried.
I was just wondering, I mean, a little bit of, does this thing apply also to the Scandinavian countries? So in the Scandinavian countries, they are increasing also, became a little bit more populist government. What is the explanation for that?
Well, I don't want to put a spanner into the works over here. They have a different electoral system,
Yeah.
which is favored by a certain group over here. So within that electoral system, you know, the national proportion of votes results in a number of seats. So, for example, in the Netherlands, which is outside Scandinavia, there's one member of parliament, you know, basically fighting for the rights of dogs and cats. Okay.
animal rights.
Yeah, but they get, in the German system, that member of parliament would not be there. The reason is that you're talking about Hitler. Hitler got 1/3 of the votes and got 1/3 of the seats. Perfect proportional representation. They don't have that in Germany. Unless you secure 5% of the votes, you are completely out.
That's why in Bangladesh we are now fighting.
Yes,
for
I
PR
have heard
system.
this. I have heard this. Okay, so those who don't favor the PR system can use the example of Adolf. Those who favor it can talk about Scandinavian systems where the populists, they get in, but they can't form governments. Or for example, in the United Kingdom, the populist parties got, I think, about 16% of the votes, which is a high proportion. I was traveling that day and I was speaking to a young lady in an airport, and I asked her, well, you're going to miss the election. You know, I have a postal vote, so I had already cast my vote. I wasn't in the country during the day of the election. And she said, well, I don't want to vote for anyone. And the data showed that if you were 18 to 25, only 20% of that age group even cast a vote. And she said, if I cast a vote, it would be for Nigel Farage, the 16% guy. Okay? We need what, 5 seats? Nothing. So, you know, if you, like one of the slides I presented, I should have said, it depends upon who you are. If you are, you know, a development NGO, you would fight for category 1, global inequality. If you represent the World Bank or the IMF or a big development bank, you would use category 2. Look, it's falling. If I'm an NGO saying, hey, there are lots of problems in the world, look, inequality is rising.
We need funding.
So it just, you know, we need funding, right? So it depends who you are. If you want to speak in favor of proportional representation, you can make some arguments. If you are against it, in the end, you know, both systems can produce horrible results.
Yes.
Still, I would argue the peer system, unless it is extreme.
PR
or
system is
we
more
call it
likely to
mixed-
produce
We call
Hitler.
it mixed action. It depends on the composition, and say mixed system can produce better result. Because it is tailored based on the local needs.
I don't know.
population.
Really, I don't know. I mean, the mix, any system which, favors proportional representation will favor minority party. Particularly if you are the third party, you will campaign for proportional representation. It makes sense.
And
Whether it's good nationally
at the
or not,
end-
depends.
at the end, at least say the populist leaders will not have swing over everything.
All right. So what you're saying is that with proportional representation, you can't get 291 seats out of 300. It's unlikely.
So there's at least
Well, yeah,
a kind of.
yeah.
People will not know their representatives. They will
No.
think for the party.
But that is also possible. That can be done.
The
That can be done.
nominated
That
list
can be
will be
done.
out.
As a class of thing. Okay.
Sir, I have a
Nice
question
to-
that what is your prediction that the inequality will rise in future? Or
No, it cannot rise too much further because it is risen so
I
much.
think, yeah, that's true.
So I think it will rise further for roughly the balance of the next quarter of a century, and then something will happen.
So we are seeing that deglobalization is happening, like the countries like USA, they are imposing tariffs and trade barriers. So in near future, if deglobalization happens, will this inequality reduce?
It can only reduce if the financial globalization diminishes. Okay? The tariffs will do nothing to the financial globalization.
No, but that's still on.
Thank you so much. I was looking for meeting you, and
Pleasure
so
to meet you,
glad.
sir.
So really,
He's a
Delighted.
political science guy.
I'm basically my
Doesn't
background
say
is,
so.
but the card says different.
It has better subjects on it.
It's a kind of
He
responsibility.
decided that political science doesn't say that he moved on to history.
Administrative
History is
responsibility.
better. It has a method, proper method. Like economics.
আপনি কতদিন আছেন?
তিন দিন পরে চলে যাবে।
Nah, if you, hey, Mumbai, he can actually give something online if you want.
আমরা দেখি একটা ওয়েবিনারের ব্যবস্থা করবো। খুবই ভালো লাগছে, খুবই ভালো লাগছে।
আমি তো ছিলেন না, কি করে ভালো লাগে।
না না, ওই যে কি যেন বলা হয়, ভাত একটা টিপ দিলে বোঝা যায় না।
ও আচ্ছা, বুঝে গেছেন।
কেন বুঝবো না?
উনি তো
আর
চলে
আমার
গেছেন,
তো একটা-
চেয়ারম্যান সাহেব তো চলে গেছেন।
আমার
উনি বলছেন তাড়াতাড়ি করো, তাড়াতাড়ি।
তাছাড়া before I am meeting you, I know little about you.
আচ্ছা।
So কাজে
No one knows anything about me. They know about my relatives.
He disappeared from the country right after independence. If I'm not mistaken, right?
Intermediate পরীক্ষাটা যে সৌভাগ্যটা
Yeah, before, or little before that. But that's
ওই
true.
ওই যে কলেজে থাকে না ওই 80% অ্যাটেন্ডেন্স না থেকে ইন্টারমিডিয়েট পরীক্ষা দেওয়া যায়
Right.
আবার ছিল দিতে পারেন
Mohsin, you wanted to? Mohsin, come here.
হ্যাঁ
Hey, no, 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 no. Yeah.